There's gonna be a whole lot of glare happening in this video, but I am nearly blind today, so it is what it is. Hello fellow readers and readresses, June is upon us, so it is time to look back into the past month and see what I was able to read in the month of May. And let me spoil it for you, I had very high expectations and I didn't do that great. Let's begin with a summary of my TBR for May, which wasn't that big to begin with. I had a very nice TBR game, you can watch it here if you want to. We had Echo Burning by Lee Child, which is the 5th book in the Jack Reacher series, and it was for series jar pick. The second one was The Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan, which was for a book that has a "the" in the title from the prompt cards. Then we had Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain for a classic. Then we had Air of Fire by Sarah J. Maas for a young adult book, again I believe from the prompt cards. Then The Second Sleep by Robert Harris for historical fiction. And we had Mockingjay as a leftover from my April TBR, and The Frugal Wizard's Guide for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson, which was also a leftover from April. In addition to those two, I do Aurelium Reading Challenge and the Buzzword Reading Challenge every month, and for Aurelium we had a book that finishes on an odd page number, and for Buzzword Reading Challenge we had Flavors. So we had a total of 7 books on my TBR plus 2 question marks for the reading challenges, and I was able to finish only 6 books in the month of April, and some of those weren't even on my TBR. So let's go through the books that I was able to finish in the order in which I finished them. The first book that I finished in May was The Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan. This is the 4th book in the Percy Jackson series, and I was so excited to read it, and for a good reason. This was the best book of the series so far, and it made me so excited to read the rest of it, which is I think only 1 book at this point. It follows pretty much our usual characters with some small additions that go to the usual quest and meet a bunch of challenges, but the world got so much more expanded. We learned the answers to some mysteries, and some other big mysteries got revealed to us as such. I was super excited about it. I loved the setting. I think it was masterfully done with the labyrinth and all of that, and this is where I'm gonna leave it because I don't want to spoil you about anything. I gave this book 4 stars, and the only reason I did so was because I simply couldn't stand Annabeth in this book. She has been always a little bit irritating to follow in all of the books so far from the series, but in this one she really hit the ceiling with being absolutely unbearable. For a daughter of Athena, she is super unreasonable and illogical in many cases and acts really erratic. I just wanted to throttle her the entire time, and I'm not even sure what throttle her means, but I wanted to do it. That's how much she annoyed me. Again, I gave the book 4 stars. I am super excited to read the last book from the series, and I'm gonna pick it up as soon as I can. The next book I finished was Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This is a young adult science fiction dystopian and is the 3rd book in the Hunger Games trilogy. I think everybody is familiar with it, but I felt compelled to give it an introduction nevertheless. When I started reading this one, I was a little bit worried that it's gonna be much of the same because the nature of the story kind of entails that. However, I should have known better because I was worried about the same thing in the 2nd book, Catching Fire, and Suzanne Collins managed to deliver way above my expectations. And in this case, because Catching Fire finished on such a cliffhanger, I should have known that it's gonna be way more interesting, and it was. This was such a vast book, especially given the page count that it occupies. I can't believe the author managed to fit so much in 400 odd pages. There was so much that happened here. We changed settings so many times, and I was just enthralled the whole time. One of the things that I didn't think I'm gonna like, but I did, was the pacing, because it was lightning fast, yet the author managed to find time for some quiet moments of reflection and consideration, and she utilized this time in many cases to do this thing that I really like that she does, where the main character considers her circumstances and tries to reason out what is going on, and in this way makes us consider what's going on and makes us trying to reason it out. And I really like that. There's a lot of reveals done in this way, and this is one of my favorite methods for revealing secrets to the reader. There was a lot of devastation, plot twists, betrayals, horror, loss, and realism basically in this very unrealistic book. I can't stop being amazed by the depth that this author has managed to create, by the multi-layered characters, both main and supporting. There's a lot of self-discovery, very appropriate for a young adult book, but also a lot of consideration of the other point of view and a lot of conflicting morality, which I find fascinating. And one more thing I loved was the bold and gritty choices that the author has made, both with the plot of this book, but also with the ending of it. It was one of the most beautiful, bittersweet endings that I have read, and I loved it. And let me say this, there is a reason why this series is such a staple in the genre and why it sprung so many copycats. It's the best of the best in this genre, in my opinion, from what I've read so far, especially in the young adult category. And I have such a tremendous respect for the author, for what she has managed to create with the Hunger Games series. Obviously, I gave it 5 stars. The next book I finished in April was The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson, which is one of the longest titles of books I ever read. It is a standalone adult high fantasy and the second secret project from the year of Sanderson. As a backer of the Kickstarter, I got the ebook on the 1st of April, which was the date that it was released for the backers of the Kickstarter. I still haven't gotten my physical copy. I think it's supposed to arrive within the next month or so. At least I'm hoping it will. I read it as an ebook. I started it in April and I finished it in May. And when I started it, I had no idea what to expect because I had tried to stay away from spoilers for those books. I wanted to go into them as blind as possible. And to be honest with you, up until 30 to 35% of this book, I still had no idea what I was reading. I was very confused, and it didn't help that the main character was confused as well. The setting is medieval England with an asterisk because it's an alternate universe, kind of a multiverse type of fantasy. And then once 35% was passed, I was able to adjust to the story and kind of get into it and be able to keep up. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is an adult sci fantasy, and it is a sci fantasy, but the adult aspect is a little bit questionable in my mind, because although the main character that we follow is an adult, and all the other characters in this book for that matter are also adult, and the themes that the book covers are adult themes, the writing style and the personality of the main character make it a little bit more childish, I would say, more young in the expression of the story. So I would call it middle grade for adult if that is a thing. Basically, it is a very serious story, but with a very light-hearted tone. There's a lot of spirit of adventure and a lot of spirit of discovery in this story, and I quite enjoyed that aspect of it. Now, if I have to criticize this book, and I will because it's not perfect, obviously, it's for the fact that I personally don't think that it was developed enough to be considered a finished product. There was a lot of ideas injected into this story, but a lot of them went nowhere. And I'm gonna give one example here as a spoiler, so you can go to this timestamp in order to not be spoiled. The specific plot line that I would like to address here is the black bear and his dark beasts and this whole thing about them. It was injected into the story, but it went nowhere, and while the forest and its beasts were kind of present in the story, it never materialized into anything. And to me, at least in the beginning, it seemed like it was gonna be a big thing, and then it turned into nothing. It seemed like this thing that the author wanted to put into the book but didn't know exactly how he's gonna develop. He just had a vague idea of it, and then he threw it in it, and nobody took the time to actually polish it. And I have a similar feeling about the rest of this book. It was a great idea, and I liked the majority of it. I liked reading it, to be honest. I had a good time, but I think it could have been way better had they spared more time to polish it. And here is a little bit of an unpopular opinion maybe, but I kind of wish this was not a standalone, and I kind of hope that it would end up not being a standalone because of what the author said in his note to this book, which I will not discuss here because again, I don't want to spoil anybody about anything. In my heart, I don't feel like this story got the attention and the effort necessary in order to unfold its full potential, of which there is a lot. So I ended up giving the book 3.5 stars, and it's obviously not my favorite Sanderson's work, but I did enjoy reading it quite a lot, especially after the 40% mark. I think the idea was very original. I just think it deserved a little bit more development and a little bit more time polishing the story. I was actually considering doing a full review of this book because I have a lot to say, and maybe I will once I get my physical copy. The next book that I finished in May was Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. This is a middle grade to young adult adventure story, and this book is a bind-up of the stories of both boys. I have read this book when I was a kid, and I remember immensely enjoying it, and I still did reading it today, which is probably a controversial statement for a lot of people given the time that this book was written in and the language that was used in this book. And I'm gonna say what I tell everybody who brings up this opinion to me. I can't don't be mad at a good author for living at the time that he did. We're not better people than the people that lived back then. It's just easier nowadays to hold the opinions that we do publicly. And while I obviously disagree with the politics and the morality from back in the day, I can still appreciate a good book and the talent of an author who has laid the foundation for literature as it is today. And I think we should all try to make the effort to find it in our hearts to look past the outdated morals of back in the day. Again, all those people, all those authors, they are a product of their time. And while I can obviously see the faults in the way that they were thinking, I am secure enough in my conviction to be able to look past that and to be able to be objective about why it is the way it is and still appreciate a good piece of literature for what it is. So I enjoyed immensely reading this story and I gave the book 5 stars. Also, I used this book for my Aurelium reading challenge where the prompt was to read a book that ends on an odd page number, and this one is on page number 559. The next book that I finished, I actually read for my buzzword reading challenge where the prompt was, as I mentioned earlier, flavors. And I picked it up because it was the only one in my bookshelves that had flavor in its title and I had not yet read and wasn't a second or third book in a series. And the book is Sweet Home Alaska by Carol S.B. Dagg. I hope I'm pronouncing the author's name correctly. This is a standalone middle grade to young adult historical fiction story about a girl that moves to Alaska with her family, and this was a vastly inappropriate season to read it in because the book is about cold weather, but nevertheless I enjoyed it so much. It was so cozy, just so nice. It was like a hug in a book form, and I enjoyed it so much. It's this fish out of water kind of setting where a girl moves to a new place that she doesn't like and she misses her old home, and then gradually the place grows into being her new home and holding a special place in her heart, and she starts loving it. And I loved reading about it too. I read it within a few hours. I just couldn't put it down once I picked it up. It was lovely. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it, and if you have children, especially little girls. Again, the setting of this book was great, but there's also a lot of simple wisdom about life stored into it, and I really just had the best time reading it. I gave it 4.5 stars. The next and last book that I finished in May, I can't share here with you because it's part of a secret project that you will probably see materialize on my channel within the next 2 months or so. So please bear with me. I think it's gonna be worth it. But that's not all I read in May because I started some books that I haven't yet finished. The first of which is Echo Burning by Lee Child. This was on my May TBR and is the 5th book in the Jack Reacher series. I am already halfway through it, even though I started it just like a day ago or so, and I am having the best time with it. It's such an interesting setting. I love it. It's hot. It's in the desert. I love reading this book. It's just so gripping to me, but I will talk more about it in my June wrap-up when I actually finish the book. The other book I started was also on my May TBR, and that is Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas, which is the 3rd book in the Throne of Glass series, and I'm having the best time with it too, although I have only read 3 or 4, actually 5 chapters so far. I'm enjoying it. We are buddy reading it with a friend of mine and both of us are so excited about it. But again, I haven't read enough of the book to give opinion of it yet, so I'm gonna include it in my June wrap-up. And I'm also reading one more book right now, but it's also a part of that secret project, so I'm not gonna talk about it now. And there is one book on my TBR that I didn't even start yet, and that is The Second Sleep by Robert Harris. This is a historical fiction that I was so excited about, but I didn't have the time to pick it up or the desire, to be honest, but I am gonna transfer it to my June TBR, so don't be worried, it's coming soon. And so to summarize my stats for May, I finished 6 books which amounted to a total of 2,534 pages. In terms of genre, I read 1 classic, 3 fantasies, 1 historical fiction, and 1 science fiction. In terms of formats, we had 1 paperback, 4 hardbacks, and 1 ebook. And in terms of sources, I owned absolutely every single one of those 6 books, which makes me really happy. And that's it for my May reading wrap-up. It's not my best reading month, but definitely not my worst reading month, and I enjoyed the vast majority of the books that I read, which I think is the most important thing in this case. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please let me know what you read in the month of May. Have you read any of these books? What did you think about them? All of those nice things. I'd be really happy to chat about this. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to see some of my other reading wrap-ups, check out this playlist. Bye!